quickly tell me the difference between open intervals and closed intervals, or tell me the difference between a set and an interval. So you have a real line which goes indefinitely on both sides. Maybe you have the 0 here, and then you have the 1 and the -1 over here. Give me an open interval on this real line. -1, 2. I'll take -1, 2. -1, 2 is an open interval. What numbers does this open interval have? What are the elements of this open interval? Interval is a set, first of all. Okay, what elements does this set have? What are the elements of this set? Are they -1, 0,
Every real
1, and 2? Are these the elements of this set?
We
every
don't know.
number between -1 and 2, excluding -1 and 2.
When you say number, what kind of a number is it? Is it an
Real number.
integer? Are only integers a part of the set, or the
Real
rationals are
number.
also, irrationals also, or collectively you call them real numbers? All real numbers from -1 to 2, excluding -1 and 2, are present in this interval. Which is the number lying right next to -1? What's the number right next to -1?
Limit x tends to -1.
You cannot really speak about it, right? You do not know which real number lies right next to -1 or right before 2. Closed interval -1, 2, what elements does it have? It has all real numbers from -1 to 2, and it also has the numbers -1 and 2. Now, if I just consider a set, what is the difference between this set and this set? The latest set that I wrote there in curly braces, what is the difference between that set and the open interval that I've written here?
That one has only two integers,
Yeah,
-1
it
and
has
2.
only two elements, which are -1 and 2. The set that I've written using curly braces has just two elements, -1 and 2, whereas this open interval has all real numbers between -1 and 2. Just a set, and what an interval is. Interval is a special set that has continuous numbers there, all real numbers from that number to the other number. I'll give you a function f on the closed interval a comma b. A comma b are some real numbers. This closed interval contains all real numbers from a to b, including a and b. All right. F is a function defined on the interval a comma b. What do I mean by defined here? When do I say that f is defined on a comma b? Closed interval a comma b. What does that mean? For every x that belongs to this set, for every real number x that lies in this closed interval a comma b, f of x exists or is defined, right? The function value exists. That is what is meant by f is defined on that closed interval. We'll try to define what a definite integral is. We'll consider some closed interval on this x-axis. X-axis is a real line. Okay, x-axis and y-axis both are real lines. We'll consider a closed interval on the x-axis. I'll consider 2, 8. All right, I'll consider the closed interval 2, 8. And let's say I have a function f which is defined on this closed interval 2, 8, which means function values exist from 2 to 8. For all x belonging to the closed interval 2, 8, f of that x is defined. There are no holes here. Okay, so the graph is continuous. I'm considering a continuous function or defined on the closed interval 2, 8. And now, I want to find the definite integral of f of x. I want to find the definite integral of f of x with respect to x from 2 to 8. I want to integrate this function from 2 to 8 with respect to x. First of all, what does this mean? What is the geometrical interpretation of integration? What does it give you? It gives you area under the function. Area under the function, does that area extend below the x-axis? We're saying it's area under the function, right? This area under the function, when we say that we want to integrate f of x from 2 to 8, we want to find the area under this function f. But yeah, area under the curve. Does that area go below the x-axis? Is this area also covered? Yes, it's just till the x-axis, right? When you integrate f of x with respect to x from 2 to 8, the area that you get is under the curve and above the x-axis and between these lines, between these boundaries. Okay, we're trying to find this area. What leads do you have to find out this area mathematically? Do you remember those rectangles, those vertical rectangles? Then you found out the area of those rectangles, you added them up, and that gave you the total area under the curve, approximating using rectangles, yes. So to get those rectangles, firstly, what we'll do is, this interval that I have, 2, 8, this interval, closed interval 2, 8 that I have, I'll split this interval into subintervals. Okay, subintervals. Let's say I want n subintervals between 2, 8, n subintervals. If I say n is 3, I'll just draw this 2, 8 again. I have this real line where 2 is here and 8 is here. I want to divide this interval into 3 subintervals. To get 3 subintervals, how many points in between do I have to choose? How many intermediate points did I have to choose here between 2 and 8 to get 3 subintervals? I have to choose 2 points, right? That point may be 3 and say 5. Okay, so if I choose 3 and 5 as 2 intermediate points, I'm going to get 3 subintervals. 2, 3, 3, 5, and 5, 8. Okay, and then I can draw rectangles above them and try to approximate the area. Okay, that's the idea now that we're going to follow. So if I want n subintervals, how many intermediate points do I have to choose? N minus 1. For 3 subintervals, if you chose 2 intermediate points, for n subintervals, you want to choose n minus 1 intermediate points. All right. So yeah, the 2, 8 here is generally a, b. All right. 2, 8 is just an example. The closed interval that you should have in mind from the definition is the closed interval a, b. Okay. Now, this closed interval a, b, in our mind 2, 8, we want to divide this interval into n subintervals. So I'm going to choose n minus 1 intermediate points. Those n minus 1 intermediate points, I'll call them x1, x2, x3, n minus 1, right? So xn minus 1, okay? These points are between a, b. If you're going to look at it as 2, 8, these points are between 2 and 8. So x1 is a real number greater than 2. It will not be integer or a rational number. It could be an irrational number also. These are real numbers. The x1, x2 till xn minus 1 that I've chosen are real numbers lying in between 2 and 8. And you know that on the real line, the real numbers are in ascending order, right? They're not in random order. They're all in ascending order. So there is some inequality that they have to satisfy here, right? There is some inequality that they have to satisfy. What inequality is it? Is it x1 less than x2? We'll choose this inequality, x1 strictly less than x2, x2 strictly less than x3, x3 strictly less than the next number, and so on, right? These intermediate points that you've chosen will satisfy this inequality. Now, a and b are also real numbers somewhere on the real line there, and let's denote them as x0 and xn. You call a as x0 and you call b as xn, okay? And these intermediate points that I chose, x1 till xn minus 1, are between them. So x0 here will be strictly less than x1 and xn will be strictly greater than xn minus 1. Yes? Is so much understood? So these points are in between. Let's say x1 is over here, x2 is over here, x3 is over here. There are some real numbers. I do not know what they are. Some random real numbers chosen in some random order. No, not random order, in ascending order. All right. The 2 is x0 here and the 8 is xn. We've divided the main interval a, b into n subintervals. To get n subintervals, we chose n minus 1 intermediate points. Now, once you've chosen the interval, we'll speak about the first subinterval here. The first subinterval is x0, x1, right? The first subinterval that you can see is the closed interval x0, x1, okay? How do you find the length of this interval? What is the length of this interval? If I call the length of this interval as delta x1, if I call the length of this subinterval as delta x1, how do you find its length? It's x1 minus x0, yes. x0 minus x1. Similarly, the length of the second subinterval is going to be x2 minus x1, right? You can go on doing this. So if xi is the ith subinterval, the length of the ith subinterval in general is going to be xi minus 1. And the length of the last subinterval, that's delta xn, is going to be xn minus 1. All right. Why are we getting the lengths? Why are we trying to find the lengths of these subintervals? Remember, the main picture is we're trying to draw rectangles here. We're trying to draw rectangles, and the even bigger picture is the area. So tell me, why are we finding these lengths? Yes, one side of the rectangle. How do you get the area of the rectangle? Length into breadth? No. So you want the length and you want the width. Length into width. So length we've gotten like this. How will you get the width of the... okay, wait. I should speak about something else before. So see, for example, all right. So the rectangle along the first subinterval, that's not a rectangle, that's a trapezium. This is going to be the rectangle. Yeah. Okay. So I want you to find the area of that rectangle. I've got the length of it. I've got the length of one side of this rectangle. This length is going to be x1 minus x0, and I've denoted that as delta x1. All right. Now, how do I find the width of this rectangle? Or if I say the delta x1 is the width, give me the length of the rectangle now. The length of the other side. What? Yeah. We could use f of x1. Right? F of x1 is 1, that value there. Okay, yeah, the height. Thanks for the word. Why was it not coming to my head? Height of the rectangle. It could be f of x1. It is f of x1. It cannot be other values. Okay, what I'm saying wrong here is, if you choose any value in between, x0 and x1, f of that value is going to be the same as f of x1. I'm asking, if I choose any value in between, say, you call it xi. Okay, you call it xi1. Xi1 is a value between x0 and x1. All right. Now, if I find out f of xi1, is that value same as f of x1? The height of this rectangle is right now f of x1, because see, f of x1, here is the function value. See, if xi1 is over here, okay, and if I try to plot f of xi1, the height f of xi1 is going to be so much. So then our rectangle will be this. If you multiply the f of xi1 with the delta x1, okay, if you multiply f of xi1 with delta x1, this is going to give you the area of this rectangle here. This is going to be the rectangle. All right. Similarly, you choose another value in between x1 and x2. Now, in the second interval, that is x1, x2, try to find another value. Choose a random value in this interval. You call it xi2. And then you find out what is f of xi2. Okay. Say if xi2 is over here, this is x1, x2. If xi2 is over here, f of xi2 is going to be so much. F of xi2 is going to be that. Okay. And then if you try to multiply the f of xi2 with the length of the second subinterval, that's delta x2, it's going to give you the area of this one is over here. It's going to give you this rectangle. Reaching x2 here. This is supposed to be x2. All right. This is the area that you're going to get when you multiply the f of xi2 with delta x2. This is the area that you're going to get when you multiply f of xi1 with delta x1. Okay. How many such rectangles are you supposed to draw here? as many number of subintervals that you have. So go on drawing such rectangles till you have the last one. How are you going to draw these rectangles? Firstly, you divide the main interval into subintervals, n subintervals. Find out the length of each subinterval. Okay, so that's going to give you one side of the rectangle. Then you choose a random point in every such subinterval. Say for the ith subinterval is this, xi minus 1 comma xi. This is the ith subinterval. A random point in this subinterval, you call it xi I. Okay, so the area of the ith subinterval is going to be f of xi I times delta xi I. Right, this is going to be the area. So in that manner, you try drawing all such rectangles. You'll get rectangles like these. All right. So when you add up the sum of the areas of all these rectangles, it's approximately going to give you the area under the curve. Understanding? Okay. What was this area though? What is the entire area now in terms of f of xi I, delta xi I, delta xi? Can I write it over here? Yes, summation. See, the area of the first rectangle there was f of xi I delta, first one was xi1, delta x1. The area of the second rectangle was f of xi2 delta x2. If you went on like this, the area of the last rectangle was f of xi n delta xn. Somewhere in between, you'll have f of xi I delta xi, right? So if you add up all these areas, that's going to give the approximate area under that curve above the x-axis, under the curve of that function above the x-axis, okay? This summation you generally represent as summation as I goes from 1 to n. You can see the I is going from 1 here till n, right? So I running from 1 to n, f of xi I in general, delta xi, right? This is the area. Okay, this is the area when we divided this main interval into n subintervals in this manner. Okay, this is one approach. What we can do next is to get a better area here, to get a better approximation, you can shorten the length of these intervals, subintervals. You can try to shorten the length of the subintervals, make the rectangles as thin as possible, as thin as it becomes lines. Try and make the length of the intervals, all these intervals, as small as possible, tending to 0, such that when you then draw the rectangles, these gaps are going to, you're going to get rid of these gaps in between. You see these gaps here? When I've taken the approximation in this manner, in subintervals, there were some gaps over here which did not cover the area, and there was some extra area here, right? To get rid of all this, decrease the length of all your subintervals as much as you can till you get just lines here as rectangles. Your rectangles become as thin as lines. Okay, you might have infinite number of lines there in between, as many lines as you cannot count, and then you're going to get rid of these gaps in between so that you get the most approximate area under the curve of this function. All right. Now, this I do not have another word. I have to call it partition. The subintervals that I chose here, x0, x1, n subintervals that I chose here, when I put them under the set, I'll call that set as a partition. All right. This was one kind of partition that I've done. You can have many other partitions. Meshes later on R square, Alston. Right now we are on the real line. When we find out the volume, it's going to be a mesh. Partition, I was speaking about partition. The x0, x1 till xn that I chose the first time, this is going to be one partition. and I'm going to denote it as this, just delta. Okay, this is going to be delta. And there is a word that I want you to learn here, which is called norm. Have you read the word norm in the PDF that I gave you? This is important. What is norm of a partition? Norm of a partition.
The maximum length of an subinterval.
Yeah, among the n subintervals, you find the subinterval which has the maximum length. You find the subinterval which has the maximum length. Okay, that length is called the norm of that partition. You could have many other partitions here. I could call them y0, yn till ym. You can have many such partitions here. Each such partition you can give some notation. In general, you can give this delta. Okay, so if delta is one such partition, its norm is going to be denoted like this. Okay, double lines and like that. Okay, this is going to be the norm of this partition that I've chosen. If I call this partition as say chi, okay, the norm of this partition is going to be denoted like this. All right. So in general, you denote a partition like that, delta. Norm is the length of its biggest subinterval. Choose the subinterval which has the maximum length. That maximum length is called the norm of that partition. Okay. Now, why are we trying to speak about the norm of a partition here? What is the benefit of bringing up this maximum length? When we want those rectangles to be minimized to lines, how can you speak about that in terms of norm? See, in this partition that I've drawn here, this is one such partition of this subinterval 2,8. In this partition, the maximum length of any subinterval that is there here is here. Okay, let's say this is the largest subinterval that I've got, and its length is going to be the norm of this partition. Okay, the significance of speaking about norm is, as the norm tends to 0, okay, the rectangles that you have here are going to become just lines.
Yes, ma'am.
The biggest subinterval that you have here, its length is going to be norm. As norm tends to 0, the rectangles are going to be looking just like lines. All right, and then we're going to get the approximate area by eliminating those gaps there in between that I've denoted in orange here. We'll go to the definition by Lewis-Leathord. Okay, so let f be a function whose domain includes the closed interval a comma b. This we've discussed. The f was defined on the closed interval a comma b. Then f is said to be integrable on the closed interval a comma b if there is a number L satisfying the condition that for every epsilon greater than 0, there exists a delta greater than 0 such that the difference between this sum we discussed just now, right? This sum that is there here, summation I running from 1 to n, f of xi I times delta xi. This sum was the area under that curve, approximate area under that curve. So if you can find a number L such that no matter what partition you take, here we took one such partition, there can be many other partitions, infinite number of partitions in fact. For any partition that you take, if you can find a number L such that when you take every such partition, that sum that I just wrote there is going to be approximately equal to L. Okay, then L is going to be the definite integral there. Okay, for every partition delta, for which the norm is going to be less than delta. This value that you have here is called the norm. This notation here, right? This notation is the norm. Norm is what now? The length of the biggest subinterval in that partition, okay? As that becomes less than delta as in, if like in last class I told you delta is a very small number, almost close to 0, then the norm almost is equal to 0, right? And for any xi I in the closed interval, you could choose any xi I there. Here, we randomly chose xi I. For this rectangle, I could have also chosen, instead of xi2, which is over here, I could have chosen it over here and then drawn this rectangle over here, right? If this was f of xi2, I can choose any such xi, okay? Any such xi. In one single partition, you can have any choice of xi, that's what it says. And for any xi in the closed interval, xi minus 1, comma xi, I running from 1 to n, if that partition has n subintervals, okay? For any partition that you take, which has n subintervals in it, delta is the notation of that partition, norm is denoted by that. As norm becomes very close to 0, that sum here, the approximate sum, this is called the Riemann sum. The difference between that sum and L is a number that you've chosen, okay, which is very close to that sum, no matter which partition you take. Okay, so it becomes less than epsilon, means it becomes almost, this difference becomes almost 0. Right? If you have any doubts on this, you ask now. We just have 3 minutes left. You can go through this PDF for better understanding.